What's up, YouTube land? It's your boy Anton, aka Dr. Mix-a-Lot, and today is another entry into the Doc's Mix-Up Blogs, where I give you some of my experience over the years to give you some tips and tricks on how to run a successful business of your own. Today's topic is conflict resolution. I'm going to try to teach you how to handle disputes that will inevitably come up within your business within five hopefully easy to follow steps should you ever get to this. Now, I have to be honest, you probably will get to this at some point. Really, as a measure of your success, the more events you have, the more, unfortunately, increased probability that things can go awry. But as a competent mobile bartender business owner, you have to be able to handle all of those disputes, and they will inevitably come up. So while a lot of our parties are going to go great, you have to realize that there are going to be some bad apples that just go awry for whatever reason, and you have to be able to deal with those in a competent and professional manner. I'll even admit myself, I probably have maybe over 150, even 200 testimonials. I promise you, I do my best to have about 90 to 95% of them 4 out of 5 stars or higher. But with that said, I do have a few clunkers in there. And I just want to give you some of my experience on how I dealt with those to avoid getting even more bad testimonials, to avoid that. So the first step you want to do is to make sure before you do anything else, get both sides of the story. Often you'll hear a complaint more often out of your customer first than the bartender, unless something went horribly awry and the bartender's in. But you want to make sure that if you hear something from one side, that you have both sides of the story so you can act accordingly. I've made this mistake a couple of times on both the customer side and the bartender side, where I only had one part of the story, and I kind of went headlong charging into the situation when I really didn't have the accurate picture. So you just want to make sure that you hear from both of them before you come to a decision on how to settle the dispute. The next thing you're going to want to do, step 2, is to review the details of your contract and all your correspondence with both your bartender and your customer to the point that you can see it in writing. That's very important, because we can sit here and dispute things that we said over the phone, but it's easier to make sure that you can hold people accountable for what you guys discuss, preferably in the contract, but secondarily in an email. Now, again, I'm going to harp on it. This is why contracts are so important, because, again, 70% of the communication that goes unsaid with your customer should be in your contract, and especially for events just like this. So, if for example, if your bartender is late, there should be a clause for that. If your bartender has to refuse service to a guest, there should be a clause for that. If your bartender displayed bad behavior or did not operate according to any protocols you have, especially COVID in this time and age, there should be a clause for that. If you have to charge your customer for a late fee for a late payment, clause for that. If your customer was confused on a charge, there should be a clause for that, how to handle that. You should be able to point to what that charge was and figure out what happened in between. Also, if your bartender maybe forgot something, for example, charge that line item for that thing. You should be able to point it out. Hey, my bartender said he was going to bring garnishes. He didn't. I'm sorry. I charged you for that. I'll give you your money back. And even if a customer disputes a charge, again, you should be able to point to in the contract, preferably, that they signed that this is the charge. And if there's any discrepancy, we will go based on what we agreed upon. But in any case, you want to make sure you have, again, predefined criteria, charges, terms, any of that stuff in writing. So when your customer signs to that, that's what you two agreed upon. So you will at least be able to hold accountable, whether it's yourself or the customer, which both could be true. You want to at least be able to point in writing when you wrote it, when cooler heads have prevailed before you really got into it. And make sure that, look, this is what we agreed upon, this is what you signed on, and we can talk about it from there. So the point of that is to make sure that you have your case ready to argue to your customer if it comes to that point. So you want to make sure, step 3, that you only contact the customer after you've looked up the contract and then talked to your bartender and staff. Again, kind of touching off of step one, where you have to talk to both sides of the party. Make sure that if whether your customer called you first or you talked to your bartender first, you have your story straight with your bartender before you go into talking to your customer. Again, a lot of this is business, PR stuff, public relations, where sometimes you and your bartender have to have your story straight regardless of what happened, to make sure that you're on the same page and that you're able to talk to the customer with a cool head and professional manner and let them know what happened and make sure that they agree with that. Now, unfortunately, the caveat to this is that if there is a stalemate where it kind of sounds like you can't really figure out who's at fault, your bartender or your customer, where sometimes there's that gray area in between. Unfortunately, I have to unofficially say that, well, officially actually say, you probably have to side with your customer on some of these things. There will be some things where the customer was being slightly unfair or found a gray area or loophole in your contract. We can't keep it all perfect, in which case you'll have to kind of concede to your customer, because at the end of the day, you don't want to argue with your customer. You want to have a legal argument ready for your customer. And look, this is what we talked about in writing. Can we come to a resolution? But you don't want to just bicker with your customer, because that is the worst way to solve any conflict, whether you're right or not. But with that said, if your customer feels that they have a case and you can't really dispute it, again, from a professional manner, looking at your correspondence and your contracts and what you agreed to, the best thing is to go ahead and just offer first the customer discounts before you offer a full refund. Don't just give away the farm just then. Just see what it is your customers are aggrieved about. Sometimes customers just want to talk, just to vent and tell me something that, I might not have communicated them to correctly, or they were expecting from the bartender that the bartender didn't deliver. I'm telling you, 4 times out of 10, they just want to tell you about, look, I didn't really like that, but everything is fine. Hopefully they did a good job, and we can leave it at that and just make sure that you address that. But with that said, if they're feeling more aggrieved than that, you want to proactively offer them a discount. You can get creative with that. There's going to be times where there's a one-on-one line item where, like, hey, I forgot, or the bartender forgot the garnishes. I charged you for that. Here's your $25 or whatever I charge you for that back automatically, because that's pretty cut and dry. There's also situations where your bartenders might turn up late, maybe a little unprepared. So my kind of go-to is to give the customer, half an hour to an hour back off the top of the head without even thinking, just to see if that can, kind of chill them out a little bit and back them off of whatever it is that bothered them. With that said, there will be times where, you and your bartender totally effed up. That happens, hopefully very far and few in between, but sometimes those things happen. You can't control everything. And that's when you have to be prepared to give your customer a full and complete refund. Now, I put my money where my mouth is when I say this, but I tell my customers all the time, if there's any doubt, that I would rather do a party for free than to get a bad testimonial. And I truly have done that in examples that I'll share with you soon. But before I go into that, all I want to say is that it's a good idea that if you get in that jam, I have a customer service guarantee where if you hit these criteria, like the bartender shows up more than 30 minutes late for the party, you have 2 or more customer disagreements where the customer just didn't like the bartender, or the bartender wasn't serving well, any complaints, and a couple other things that I can point to my customer and say, look, did this happen or did this not happen, before we talk about a full refund. And usually with that step, with step 4, I usually offer a bit of a partial refund proactively just to see how they react. With this last step, let them evoke that clause. And that's why I like to have it in writing. So if they have to go back to that, then let them go back to that. And usually at that point, it's pretty cut and dry that, you messed up and that you probably owe them a full refund. And you should do it fully and willingly without hesitation when they ask if they can evoke that clause. Now, I always like to give real world examples. Again, I've been in this business for many years, Most of my parties go off without a hitch, whether I show up or not. I had some great set of bartenders that I've even found at the last minute that have held me down. With that said, even bartenders I've worked with for years, shit happens. I'm sorry. That's just what it happens. And in fact, a personal story of mine, which is how I really crawled out of a big hole that one of my bartenders got me into, was that actually this bartender, he did a great job at the event. I was actually just coming back from a successful event. I was working simultaneously while he was at another one. And this customer called me completely irate, talking about the bartender unfortunately got a little too liberal with some liquor that the customer said he could have, but he ended up taking way too much. Whether that was completely intentional or not, that's that gray area talking about. I worked with this person for years, and that was completely outside of their nature, outside of, my experience with them, to do that. With that said, the customer was very adamant about this is what happened. And the customer actually gave me a solution to himself. Look, if he drops off all the liquor that he took from me without asking, then I'll actually, because he actually did a good job at the event, I'll pay you half of the event. But I want that liquor back, and I want you to make sure that you talk to him. Sure enough, bartender returned whatever it was he took. I gave the customer half of his money back, which was fair because he could have asked for the full refund, and I would have done it willingly and gladly. But the customer said that the bartender did a great job. That was just a very big slight for him. But the happy ending of this is that that customer actually cooled off enough to call me about 6 months later and actually asked me to work an event for him. He wanted obviously to make sure I did it personally, to make sure that I could count for myself, but that he really felt very appreciative of how I handled that situation. Him understanding that I can't control everything my bartender does. And while I trust my bartenders, things happen, but you handle that like a professional business owner. I really appreciate that. And you can make it up to me by working me an event, which of course I gave him a discount just for the opportunity. All that to say, I've done other disputes where you hate if they get there, but if they do, you want to handle them competently, professionally, with a cool head to let this customer know that while these things may happen, we are going to make sure we do everything to make you whole and to make sure that you do not leave a bad testimonial, because that is the very last thing you want. So with that said, I hope you liked what you saw and this was helpful. If you did, make sure you click the like or subscribe button. It's your boy, Dr. Mix-a-Lot, aka Anton, signing off. As always, happy mixing and cheers to unbeatable service.